Welcome everybody to another episode of What's That All About? Today we're going to talk about being black in the military, and I actually have a special guest on the show today, Mr. Pop Dixon, who's also served in the United States Army. He's going to share some of his thoughts and experiences on some topics that we're going to cover. And mind you, I too myself served in the military. I did 20 years in the Army and I retired. And now I'm doing the whole entrepreneur thing. So we'll get into it, and hopefully we'll get something good out of this. All right, stay tuned. Shalom, family. If you haven't heard about Anchor, it's the easiest way to make a podcast. Let me explain. First of all, it's free. There's creation tools that allow you to record and edit your podcast right from your phone or your computer. Anchor will distribute your podcast for you so it can be heard on Spotify, Apple Podcast, and many more. You can make money from your podcast with no minimum listenership. It's everything you need to make a podcast all in one place. Download the free Anchor app or go to anchor.fm to get started. Let's do it. All right, welcome back. And we have Mr. Pop Dixon here on set in the building. And Mr. Pop, welcome.
Thank you.
And why don't you tell us a little bit about your journey of how you got started in the military.
All right, so when it started, that was January 2004. I had come to a place, like a lot of young people do, I guess, where I'd gotten sort of lost my way, and I wanted to fix it. I know I needed, so what I really wanted to do at that time was marry my son's mother. And I know, like a lot of young dudes, your old lady wants to be, stable and have stability and all those things. And, I was like a cable contractor at the time. So, that wasn't really steady work for me. And I said, I got to do something different.
Okay. So what was your MOS when you were in?
All right, so when I came in 2004, that was called 31 Fox.
Okay.
Network Switching Systems Operator Maintainer. It later became 25 Fox, which is a joint nodal network system technician. And 25 Fox ended up becoming 25 November. It was interesting, going through all the training and stuff like that, and then really not being able to use the training because I'm at a unit where they don't use that equipment. So, it's definitely pleasant to gain the experience, but it just didn't pan out for me so far as using it.
Okay. Yeah, I know when I joined, I went through two different MOSs. I started out as an infantryman. I was an 11 Charlie, which is an indirect fire mortarman. And to keep it 100 with everybody here on the podcast, man, like when you join the military, especially the Army, and you go into what we refer to as 11 series, they had us initially as 11 X-ray. So we're all in this big giant, it's almost like a holding cell in jail, man. And, before you get put into your actual platoons. And so we found out we were 11 X-ray, and I didn't know. I was like, I don't know what the hell an 11 X-ray is. And we didn't find out until we got to our platoon that was just a generic marker or placeholder, if you will, until they decided to put you into the Bravo, Charlie, or Delta, if you will. And then that was when we found out that we were designated 11 Charlies. And still, even at that point, I didn't know what the hell an 11 Charlie was. So I'm like, first of all, I didn't know what an 11 X-ray was. And now, I'm told I'm an 11 Charlie. I'm like, well, what the hell is that? And he was like, well, you guys are now mortars. And me being a kid from Jersey, I'm like, what the hell is a mortar? So I was just lost in the sauce, man. I didn't know what I didn't know. And then, you know, as
That's
basic
right.
training went through, I found out that I was like, okay, we're the guys that shoot these big bombs in the air, referred to as high angle hell. Let me ask you this, man, because I know when I went through basic training and everything, I was one of 3 black people in my entire unit in basic training. So, you know, I can pull up my old basic training photo, and there's 3 little brown dots in that whole picture. You know, did you go through anything similar when you went through basic training?
I would say not as much, because I went to Action Jackson for basic training. You know? So that's like, first of all, it's co-ed, and you know, it's very different from Benning. Or I'm assuming you went to Benning, right?
I did. I went Fort Benning, Georgia.
Yeah. So, and I would say that we actually had a robust number of Black Americans there, because you know, that's mostly support. You know, that's where support MOSs go to train, and you know, brothers really, as far as I know, they're not really nuts about being infantry and doing stuff like that. Plus, you know, our mothers are always like, "No, you lonely baby, you can't die. You need to go ahead and do something with the computers." You gotta. So I didn't experience that. Even my drill sergeants, I think I had like 3 people of color for drill sergeants. Maybe no, like almost. There was 2 white people that were drill sergeants where I was at.
So for me, it was the other way around, and that's the crazy thing. It's like I'm in the infantry, and I am in Fort Benning, 3 black dudes in the whole platoon.
That's right.
90% of the drill sergeants are black. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
And we had like maybe 3 white drill sergeants in the whole company, and the rest of them were brothers.
Yeah.
And then the company commander and the company first sergeant were white. So it was just like, you know, it was a shock to see that dynamic. And then I saw it change slightly when I graduated basic training and I went to my first duty assignment at Fort Hood, and then they threw me in a cavalry unit. And that's when I started seeing a more, you know, diverse population. However, combat arms, you just don't see.
In general,
you don't see a lot of brothers walking around in combat arms.
There is. That's true, man. And,
we take up all the support MOSs, you know.
That's right.
The clerks, the medics, you know, mechanics, commo, all that stuff. So, and I apologize to everybody here on the podcast for all of the acronyms that we're throwing out there, but commo is short for communications. So, but yeah, you know.
Yeah, I believe that, man. Like my dad was sort of like that too when he was a Ranger bat. Back in the early 80s, he said it was him and his buddy Joe in that whole, you know, company. And it's like, I can imagine back then that must have been a trip. You know what I mean?
Especially when he went through, because, you know, this was probably during like the civil rights era, and you know, this, you know, pardon my language, but this was back when they was probably still calling us niggers.
Right.
And you know, you had to deal with that while in uniform, and the military wasn't as always politically correct as it is right now.
That's right.
So a lot of things you had to deal with.
Yeah. What I can say about the racial diversity at basic training, for me, I feel like it was mostly people of color. We had all the Latino cats that were coming up from Puerto Rico that were, you know, Puerto Rican National Guardsmen. You know, all the brothers, you know, the sisters, like I said, the drill sergeants were all black. And, you know, they had the white female drill sergeant, but like, for real, like, my experience when I came in was not that, you know, severe. But, you know, having said that, again, it makes sense because that's where support soldiers go, and that's what I entered into the Army to do. So
right. So there was and this is why I brought you on, because, like, you know, to give everybody, to give the listeners a snapshot of what that daily life looks like for, you know, a service member of color, because it's different based upon what you do in the military.
That's
so
right.
I started out as a combat arms guy, so that's just not something us black folks really get into. And like I said, a lot of us get into the support MOSs because those MOSs, and MOS stands for Military Occupational Specialty, but those MOSs give you a much better portfolio for when you walk into the civilian world, because at the end of the day, man, when you're a combat arms guy, man, the only thing you know how to do and operate is that weapon system.
That's right.
It's just shoot the gun and walk a long way and run real fast and do a lot of push-ups, and that doesn't quite translate in the civilian world to a job skill, you know, other than police officer, you know,
right.
Maybe FBI, depending on how awesome you are, or security guard. So there's not a lot of skills associated with that. So a lot of times guys that are in combat arms have to be extremely creative with the wording on their resumes and, you know, certain schools that they get. And I'm gonna tell you right now, man, when I got to my first duty assignment, my company commander, or troop commander, if you will, because I was in a cavalry unit, he told me, you didn't sign up to be no college boy, because, you know, that was back when the military only paid 75% of your tuition versus the full 100 that they get right now.
Right.
So he said, you didn't sign up to be a college boy. I was 19 years old, and I accepted that face value. I was like, well, yeah, that's kind of why I'm wearing this uniform. I didn't do the college thing, but those options aren't really offered, and nobody really talks about it when you're in combat arms. However, it's changed, you know, over the years, because now they're making it somewhat of a standard or a benchmark for promotion. Like, you can't make that next senior rank unless you got a little bit of college under your belt. And then when you get to the super senior ranks, the top three, if you will, like the Sergeant's Major Academy, you know, they want to see some undergraduate, postgraduate education in your toolkit, because you're going to have to walk out there and be amongst field grade officers and general officers.
Tell me this then, since you were infantry, you might know, because it's something that comes in my mind a lot. Like, you can reclass out of infantry, but you can't reclass into infantry. Why is that? Do you know?
That's a myth, because I've seen guys do that. I've seen guys get out of softer MOSs, especially when I was a drill instructor. I had some soldiers that were really they were dope. They were good soldiers, man. They were strong, fast, smart. And I look, you know, when I would talk to them, I would tell them, I'm like, you don't need to be doing this, because this is when I had already reclassed to military intelligence.
Okay.
And I'll get into that a little later, but I'm like, you don't need to be sitting behind a computer. You need to be kicking in doors and shooting people in the face. That's the kind of, you know, thing you need to be doing. Yeah. So we had to put some packets together and get these guys pushed over and out of intel into combat arms, but the circumstances to some degree have to, you know, they're extenuating. It's rare that you see soldiers do that, because there's really no added benefit. And the only time I ever seen soldiers do that is when they get bored doing, you know, the computer stuff, the softer stuff. They're like, man, I don't want to sit behind this computer, or I don't want to be in the motor pool turning wrenches, fixing trucks. I want to go out in the woods and play army. You know, so when their enlistment is up and their window is open to re-enlist, they're like, well, I want to go do cool stuff. I want to be an infantry guy. So they sign up and they become infantry. And 9 times out of 10, they don't get turned down. So that's like I said, that's rare, but it's also a myth. You just don't see it happen, so people assume it's not a thing. Most people get out of combat arms to get away from that.
Right.
I got out of that because I was like, I couldn't see myself, you know, sleeping on the ground, getting rained on, walking everywhere, and doing that for 20 years. Because when I, as a young soldier, looked at all of my, you know, seniors, they just rode hard and put away wet, man. They would just they would
Pretty
just
much.
just beat up, man.
Yeah.
And then they didn't really have a whole lot to show for it, man. They had no education, no college built up. The only skills they had and what they knew was just they know how to be killers, man. And I just that wasn't something I wanted a whole 20 years out of. I wanted to be able to walk out of the military the same way I walked in. Because a lot of these guys went to jump school, Ranger school. They did all that cool stuff, which is nice, and it looks good on your uniform. But when you take that uniform off, you got all these problems, man. And a lot of guys, went down range during the wars. They got blown up.
Yeah.
A couple of dudes got, fragments in their head. There's a guy I served with that lost his eye. And he has to put special drops in his eye for the rest of his life, and they replaced it with a glass eye. It's just, he had to deal with that. And I'm like, if I would have stayed in the infantry, I would have been caught up in that, especially at the beginning, 2001, when they started rolling them out in Afghanistan.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. I think the likelihood of something happening to you like that, increases.
Yeah.
As your days go on.
Yeah.
I mean, I've seen it.
So the big question, for us as black men, and this is not excluding black women, because the black woman is the most underappreciated being
Agreed.
on this earth.
Agreed.
But the big question is there racism in the military?
Now, the question about whether there's racism in the military, I think we'll have to get the actual definition of racism to do it.
Okay.
And so Google's first thing is prejudice, discrimination, or antagonism directed against a person or people on the basis of their membership of a particular racial or ethnic group, typically one that is a minority or marginalized.
So I like how Google likes to change, the true definition, the definition of racism. So
That's right.
they wrote that definition in such a way to where it can apply to anybody, and we all know that that's not, how racism works. Racism is to have complete control over somebody's their well-being, their health, their shelter, their finances, their education. Like, you control the processes of their life at every level.
Right.
So when you're in positions to do that, that's racism. So like institutional racism, when we go to a bank to apply for a loan, we get denied, or we get told certain things like, oh, you don't have enough capital, or you hear the cliches that they use to kind of put us in a certain pocket to make us feel like we're not deserving. And that's racism at its finest. So when I say, and I ask the question, is there racism in the military? My answer to that would be yes. When you look at the hierarchy of leadership in the military, you look at everything from the president all the way down to the general officers. How many of those general officers in those ranks are black? Okay. How often do you see a brother or a sister get the table slapped to be selected as a general officer? It's very rare. But you'll see a whole slew of us as senior non-commissioned officers.
I was just gonna, that definitely happens.
So,
is there racism in the military? Yes, I believe that there is a degree of racism in the military. I mean, I don't think it's, I think it's more subtle. It's not as in the face as, like you said before, like back
no doubt.
Back when they, hey boy, and this stuff that, like that back in the day. Yeah, it wouldn't happen like that now. Well, I'll talk about that one too. But yeah, man, like I definitely believe that there's racism in the military, and it's not just racism. See, again, it goes back to definition, and I was going to say that I'm pretty sure I've seen where, black people that can't stand white people. And I've watched them treat them a little differently than they treat the brothers or the sisters, which, I mean, is there anything wrong with that?
But is it racism, though?
Right, though. Is it racism? That's what I'm saying. And
it's more or less
more
a prejudice.
Absolutely.
Because when it's racism, that means you can control how they live.
That's right.
You control their every circumstance, and that's one thing we as black folks we've never had the power to do. Even when we had a brother sitting at the White House in office, we didn't have that power to create any kind of circumstance for anybody or to change our own narrative. We've never been able to do that. So, and that's where the other cliche term of reverse racism comes in,
which is what I was speaking to, I guess.
I think that's more or less a bullshit term. That's like saying Blue Lives Matter. So, but yeah, so racism, it does exist in the military.
Racism exists in the military. I'll tell you what, when I saw it the most, it was when I went from conventional force to non-conventional force.
Oh, you went to the dark side.
Went to the dark side, and like the funniest thing, man, because I went to 2 different units, one in Okinawa and another one in Stuttgart, Germany, and the one constant seemed to be that the signal detachment where all the brothers were. Mm-hmm. But all the teams, it's all white boys. Just a few brothers here and there. Not really. But as far as Green Berets were concerned, there were a few. I could count them all on one hand. But it was in those places where I would say you really got the feeling that, okay, racism exists here. You get there, everyone's chewing dip. Mm-hmm. Confederate flags in the back windows, and it's just like, oh, okay, this is what we're doing now.
Because it's unregulated when you're in a soft unit, which is Special Operations Forces, like on that side, man. There's nobody really checking up on those guys, man.
Very far from the flagpole.
They get a blank check to do a lot of cool shit,
mm-hmm.
and sometimes that cool shit, you got that line, and they're like a couple of steps past the line.
Yeah.
So of course you're going to see some of that rhetoric being spewed there, because more than likely the leadership that walks around in those units probably have that same mentality. Now, I'm not saying that's inclusive to everybody in special operations, because
right.
I've known some really good dudes in special ops, man. That's just they're real stand-up guys, man. It's just all it takes is just a handful, man. To poison a unit, and it doesn't have to be a soft unit to do that. You could be in a regular Army unit, and all you need is like 3 or 4, dudes that's just about that bullshit, man. Yeah. And they can create, havoc in the
with
unit.
With impunity, man, because like the people who know that they're like that won't even talk about it.
Yep.
They know it, and they know they can see something happening to you on account of that person, but no one's got the courage to really, it just doesn't happen that much, man. I think it's easier to let sleeping dogs lie than to actually address something like that.
Facts. I agree. What about promotions? Because I know I retired as an E8. I was a master sergeant, first sergeant when I retired.
Okay.
And I can honestly say, and I don't know if this had anything to do with affirmative action or whatever, but I didn't really have too many challenges when it came to promotions. And I guess that was because I'd like to consider myself to be squared away.
Yeah.
When I was in uniform, I knew my job. I knew how to do it well, and as a result, I got promoted pretty quick. But do you think that it's fair across the board when it comes to military promotions, especially when it comes to people of color, black folks,
right,
in the military?
Regarding promotions, the Army wants you to believe that it's fair across the board because you need PT test, weapons card, and some merit, if you will, to go to the board to be promoted. So they're gonna be like, well, this person didn't pass the PT test, or this other person, scored higher on this PT test, so I think we're gonna send him and not this other kid. You know, and I imagine it could look like it's racially motivated. I just don't know that promotions are like that. Not with the Army, maybe with some other branch, but like.
And PT test is physical training, guys. So that's like, you know, your push-ups, sit-ups, run. They want to make sure that, you know, they want to see how physically fit you are.
And that, I think, causes a lot of envy, though. Honestly, because physically.
Then why they want it? So okay, I get that part. You know, when you go to a board, especially from E4 to E5 and then E5 to E6. Those are your local boards.
Yep.
And when you go to those boards, you sit before your panel of all of your leadership within that type of within that unit structure. So they get to physically look at you. So that, you know, in turn, I think is I would say that it's pragmatic, if you will. It's you know. I would say that it's fair. What I don't necessarily agree with is when you start looking at the centralized boards where they have your file and it goes all the way up to Big Army or Big Navy or whatever branch of service you're in, and then you have to take that DA photo and then because there's been some guys that I've heard the rumors and the horror stories about how guys or photographers have special tricks to make guys look thinner in their uniform and all that cool stuff whenever they go and take their DA photo.
Yeah.
Fortunately, I've never had that issue because I never had that. Never had a weight problem in the military. But the guys that did struggle, you know, you got to try to look slim as you can.
Yeah.
But is it, you know, is it fair when it comes to a black person being looked at or a white person being looked at or Asian or whatever? Is the process fair?
I got a sense from before that, you know, since you mentioned the thing earlier about myth, so I believe there's this myth among, you know, like white soldiers that black women, black men, and Native Americans are getting promoted ahead of them. And I mean, I can't prove it, I can't disprove it either, but to me, I would say that, I mean, that's the kind of thing that's made of myth. That's the myth, something like that. You know what I mean? Maybe like we're talking about government contracts when you're out of the military and you own your own company, you're an entrepreneur perhaps, that maybe is a little unfair that, you know, a Native American female would get the contract secured before I could, or definitely before a white dude would, you know, prior service who has the same experience as her or whatever. I know what happens there. Right. But that's because it's federal. I'm assuming because it has to be that way. It's the government dealing with, you know, it's and affirmative action makes it necessary for that to happen.
So
I think it does.
I remember a long time ago, well, I wouldn't say it's a long time ago, but when I was in E7, I was a sergeant first class. I said, and this was before I would consider myself to be enlightened. I think I was still stuck in the world at the time. Mm-hmm. And I said, I don't care about affirmative action. I would rather just get promoted on my own merits and blah, blah, blah. I was spewing out all of the talking points that, you know, white folks love to hear. Yep. And, but, you know, hindsight is always 20/20. So I believe that the affirmative action process is somewhat necessary because we as a people are consistently and constantly disenfranchised. You know, we might not get discriminated against in the promotion process, but it'll happen somewhere else in your career, like an assignment or a position that you're trying to go for. So yeah, they'll promote you, but you ain't getting that job you want. That's right. You know what I'm saying? So it's a tit for tat type thing. So that's why I think some of these processes are necessary. But like 9 times out of 10, when it comes to us, for the most part, I'm not speaking for all black folks in the military, because I've ran across some of us that just, they need some work. They're a work in progress, a constant work in progress.
That's right.
But
to put it lightly, for
the most part, for those of us that come in and make something out of it, man, we don't we don't really need that whole affirmative action process, because most of the times we run circles around our white counterparts.
Yeah.
You know, we just outdo them. And I'm not saying that to brag or anything, but like I've some of the best leaders I've come across in my military career were brothers, sisters. You know what I'm saying? Squared away, you know, black men and black women that shaped the type of soldier that I became. My very first platoon sergeant, his name was Donzel Frazier. This was back when I was an infantry dude. And I remember while I was a young specialist, I asked him one day, I said, Sergeant Frazier, what can I do to become a non-commissioned officer? He was like, you follow me, I'll show you the way. And he did. And I ended up getting promoted. I'm 85. And then I PCS, that's when I switched MOSs. Okay. And I kept climbing the ranks, man. I made staff sergeant, then I went to go be a drill instructor, and then I went
that's why you made 7 so quick.
Oh yeah, I went to go be a drill instructor, and then I went to go do some staff time. Mm-hmm. Then I went down range, and then I made the list for E8, and then I became a first sergeant, and then I ran into Donzel Frazier again, Fort Riley, Kansas, and I saw him. It was dark. It was like 6 o'clock in the morning. It was in the wintertime, and I saw him, and I'm like, yo, Sergeant Frazier, and he looked at me. He's like, Ramsey, and we ran to each other. He gave me a big hug and everything, and everybody in my formation, they were asking me. They were like, well, who's that? I'm like, that guy was my platoon sergeant back when I was a young soldier. Now, mind you, at the moment, I outranked him. He was in E7, and I'm now in E8, and the guys in my formation were like, well, don't you think that's kind of fucked up? And I'm like, no, I don't think so. I said, what that actually shows is that man right there, he just grew a senior non-commissioned officer. And that says a lot about his leadership, is that the type of values, the type of skills that he instilled into me put me on a path to where I surpassed him. And that says a lot about him. It doesn't say that, he's bad as an NCO because he didn't hit a certain rank. He just raised a really good troop, and that's true leadership, because I've had guys that I trained that I ran into them years later, and they were officers, right? And I'm saluting them now, and they're like, yeah, man, you were my drill sergeant back in the day, and and he's doggone major in Afghanistan. Yeah. I'm like, what? Yeah. So I, the military promotions process for black folks, that's hairy. I think,
I think it's hairy as well. But you're right, though, about the centralized promotions. Like, I think at that level, when you can't just sort of hide behind your name, when Christopher Dixon is, a pretty standard name, mm-hmm. But then when you see the picture of me and you're like, oh, it's not expected.
Yeah, they'll be like, get this,
yeah, I mean,
get him out of here.
Yeah, it could happen. I don't know that it hasn't in the past.
And that's the part that we don't know. See, when you go to a local board and you're looking these guys in the eyeballs, everybody makes a decision right there on the spot. But when your paperwork gets sent up and you don't get to see anything, you don't know who's sitting on. They'll put names up there of who's sitting, who's on these boards, but like you don't know who these guys are. I didn't know none of those guys. Okay. I think my whole career, I knew one dude that sat on my board, and I didn't find that out until after I had already got selected. And but it wasn't like he was the linchpin that allowed me to get the promotion, because you're talking about a panel of like 10 dudes, man, or females. And I think at the time when I was an intel guy, before they made some adjustments to the MOS structure, we shared that promotion process with the MPs. So now you got military police officers looking at evaluation reports on intel guys, and they don't know anything about what we do. And so now we have to write our evaluations a certain way so the MP can understand, our terminology. We got to speak MP, which, by the way, guys, is military police. So, I guess the next question would be black versus white leadership. You know,
black versus white leadership.
What was your experience with black leaders versus white leaders throughout your career?
So if you want to just take it from the beginning, you know, back from basic training, I would say my impression of the black leadership that were there, the drill sergeants, you know, that's back when we had BDUs, man. The thing was crispy.
The battle dress uniform.
You know, the thing used to be crispy, man. Like, you could, you know, take the pants off and stand them up by themselves, you know, like, and the black drill sergeants, man, they just looked the part, like they were completely professional. You know, I mean, it was nice to see brothers that had it together like that.
That's why I wanted to be a drill sergeant. That was the very reason why I went to go do that, because when I looked at them dudes, I was like, I'm going to do that.
I'm going to do that, exactly.
I'm going to do that.
And that's exactly, you know, how it was for me the entire time I was in the military. Insofar as a parent, you know, I feel like the one thing that started there was like just the professional look of black soldiers, black leaders rather, versus the white leaders. I think that, you know, so
I've had some pretty squared away white leaders in my career, man. Like I've had some that were much better than some of the brothers that I had in my career. Like,
I believe that.
One of them, his name was Jackie Park. He was a captain at the time, and I was a staff sergeant, and he was like one of the best officers I worked for, man. He was just a cool ass dude, man. Very down to earth. And I ran into him later on in my career, and he had got promoted to major. I ran into him at Fort Riley. That was one place, man. I ran into a lot of cats there, man. And that's a garbage post, by the way.
That's what I heard.
There's nothing there, man. But anyways, I ran into him, and he was just a real cool cat, still cool, you know. And those are the kind of guys you want to be, you know, to see make general, because they don't overreact. The ones that I ran in, that I served with, man, that was they always, they were just never in a good mood, man. Just, you know, those guys, when they get promoted, man, Lord have mercy, you know.
Yeah. I mean, I would say that my white leadership from very early on, I didn't have a problem with, because, well, I was 27 when I enlisted, so I was already...
He's a late bloomer.
I was already older than most of those cats anyway, so they kind of like, you know, kind of just gave me some room or whatever, but, you know, they were good to me, man. Like, I didn't notice a change again until, you know, switch sides, you know, and you know, my first day at my new unit in Okinawa, you know, with group, I walked into this room, to a team room, to get some paperwork signed, and I walked in, handed the guy the paperwork, and I went to parade rest, and he's like, "Man, what the hell are you doing? Like, what's going on, Master Sergeant?" He's like, "Man, don't do that shit to me. Get out of it." He's like, stand at ease, Jesus, bro. Bro, I mean, like, my eyes got white. Like, what just happened here? Like, I thought this is where all the squared away people come, but I mean, it is. But they're gonna special force that out of you.
Yeah, they don't got time. They ain't got time for all of that, man.
They ain't got time for all that, man. And like, you know, that's kind of who I was at the beginning of my career, especially when I first got to groups. That's why I actually thought that was be more of a something that I get merit on. That I'm a person who is squared away. You know, my uniform is legit. My PT score is legit. You know, all these other things and you know, I don't want to say it was like cooning, but I know, you know, some people will say that was what that was, you know, me cooning, because, you know, like you said, the brothers don't really want to do a lot of the, you know, the infantry stuff or whatever, whereas I did. I mean, I didn't want to necessarily be infantry. My dad told me I would. He said, you know, you're about to go and go to signal. He's like, man, I'm telling you, you're going to hate it. He's like, you are going to hate it. He's like, you're going to wish that you went infantry. And he was right. He was right, because just doing what I did, I didn't feel like it was enough. I wanted to do something nutty, something that made more sense to me. And jumping out of planes, being with those dudes, I mean, I felt like that was where I wanted to be. I mean, like, I'm more of my dad's child than I'm not, you know, because he can't really explain it to me either, much more than what I just told you, as far as that the feeling, euphoria of it, man. Like, and it between black and white, as far as, you know, as leadership goes out there, you definitely see it, man. I mean, black leaders stick with black troops. It seems like, I mean, of course, you know, you can't just be exclusive with the black troops, but I mean, black leadership stuck together.
Yeah, I mean, no doubt. I mean, I did when I was in, man. Like, it's just certain things we got to do, man. Like, I pull all them black soldiers aside and be like, hey, look, this is the deal. This is how you need to move. You know what I'm saying? This is what you can do. This is what you should do, and this is what you shouldn't do. And I had black leaders do that to me when I was a young man coming in. You know, pulling me aside and giving me the game, man, and you know, showing me how to navigate the military, being black, because there are some things that makes it hard for us, and that which bridges me to the next question is, have you ever been discriminated against in any way during your career? And I know I have, and it started right in basic training. I had this we had 3 drill sergeants in my platoon, Taylor, Ruiz, and Ortweg. Ortweg was a white boy from Illinois, chain smoking, raspy voice, cool as hell though.
Yeah.
Ruiz was a black dude from New York, and Taylor was a big giant brother, you know, from the South. And he didn't really talk much, but when he did, everybody moved out the way because he was just one of them dudes.
Okay.
But one day, I had some issues with my bank, and I needed some help. So I went down to the drill sergeant's office and Ruiz was in there, and I said, drill sergeant, I need to get on the phone and, you know, call my bank. You know, mind you, in basic training, man, being able to use the phone, it's like prison, man. It's prison rules. Like, you don't get to use the phone at all. It's like once a month, you know, if you're lucky. And you get like 3 minutes on the phone. And we had them bullshit ass payphones, you know, in the lobby down there, on the drill pad. And there was this little short white drill sergeant in the room with Ruiz. And every time I was trying to talk to Ruiz, he kept butting in. And he was like, yeah, there's nothing wrong with your bank. Ain't nothing wrong with that your damn card. And I'm like, it is. I need to call and work this out. And he walked all the way up and got in my face. And he was like, what? You gonna do something?
Oh, wow.
And I didn't say anything, and it took everything in my being, every fiber in my being, to like restrain myself from putting my hands on this dude, man. And I took my card out my pocket, and I said, my card is right here. I do have issues. I need to, you know, talk to my bank. And Ruiz was just sitting there quietly. It was almost like he was letting this play out. Like, let me see what happens here. And the guy took my card and he threw that shit across the room, man.
Oh, wow.
And
okay, it's like that.
He threw it across the room, and he was like, "Yeah, so now what are you gonna do?" And I stood there, and he was like, "I bet you want to hit me right now, don't you?" And he was like egging me on, and I was just like, "Nah, man, I said, "No, drill sergeant, I'm fine." And that's when Ruiz stepped in, and he was like, "All right, man, that's enough. Hey, Ramsey, go pick up your card and get the fuck out of here. Go use the phone. You got 5 minutes." And that was that experience. And the irony behind all of that is like, about 6 years later, I ran into that same drill sergeant. Now, he was a staff sergeant back then when I was in basic training. And when I ran into him again, now I'm a staff sergeant,
right?
And he's still a staff sergeant. Yeah. So now we're you know, same rank. And I walk up to him. I was like, "You don't know who I am, do you?" He's like, "Nah, dude, I don't know." I was like, "Remember that debit card you threw across the room?" And
he probably does not.
Yeah, man. He had that. I was like, "Yeah, you remember now, don't you?" I was like, "Yeah, look, we the same goddamn rank now. Yeah. You know, I'd like to see you throw my card again."
No, it's a game changer, man. The truth is, you know, they always say do what your rank can afford. You know what I mean? And when you make rank, that's a game changer. That gives you leverage, you know, in a lot of different spaces. So.
And then that's when he retracted. He was like, "Oh, well, you know, it was just a job back then." I was like, "Man, you didn't have to do that shit. You know, that shit was unnecessary, man. Yeah. I mean, I legitimately needed help, and you were just being a dick."
Yeah.
You know,
it's excessive. I mean, it sounds like it.
Yeah.
Yeah, and you know, discrimination is one of those things that I believe is felt and is really hard to prove in the military. They've almost made it to where it's harder to prove that has been, that is discrimination, or rather, if it's addressed, it's sort of the conclusion will be that the person like feels like they've been discriminated against.
It depends on who you're accusing.
I was gonna say, yeah.
When you look at somebody that's in a command team position, like a company commander, battalion commander, those guys are layered with, their lawyers and stuff, their JAG officers. Yeah. So like, they're gonna do everything in their power to protect the interest of that commander.
Right.
So, the young guy, or even somebody like me that's on the outside, if I have a complaint, now I have to go use outside resources, and 9 times out of 10 they're plugged in with all of these commanders.
Yes.
So now you're looking at like, well, where do I go? So then command teams are sitting here wondering, and they're scratching their head or getting pissed off because these guys are calling their congressman now. And it's like, well, I'm going to call my congressman because whenever I try to utilize the services that y'all say use on post to help us out or to protect us, they're all in y'all pockets, man. They're all working together. So at least that's my observation from that. I could be wrong, and like I said, that can be based on installation.
Yeah.
It could be based on who's working in those offices, man. You might have a JAG officer that's like, all about walking the straight line and not caring about whether a commander's trying to get over or not. Like, nah, sir, you fucking up. You can't do this.
Yeah.
And that soldier's right. But that's rare to see that because their careers get shorted by doing that. I didn't mean to cut you off.
No, you did, man. Not at all. I mean, like, I that's the thing about discrimination, as I understand it, I don't know if I've ever been discriminated against. I don't know if I've, not because of my color, not because of my race. If it was about something else. It was about, me being a big Army dude versus a SF dude, Special Forces dude. I mean, like that would come up from time to time. I mean, like that sort of discrimination where, we're not gonna ask this guy to come along on this trip or whatever because he's too much Army or whatever, man. And like, discriminated like that. But I'm almost 100% certain that at some point the color of my skin was an issue, was the primary issue. I just can't tell you every time that it was. You know what I mean? Like,
they're getting a lot better at hiding, the levels of bigotry, and especially when it's mixed in with policy and regulation and all of this other stuff. Like, I'm gonna give you a prime example: grooming standards.
Yeah.
That's one big thing in the military when it comes to black women and black men. Like, for example, they just, not too long ago, they just allowed, black females to have dreadlocks.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? And that's a natural thing for us as black folks. But, they couldn't, for some reason we weren't allowed to have it. Women weren't allowed to have it, and now they're allowed to have it, you know, and that's a part of our culture. When I was getting ready to retire, I had I let my hair grow out a little bit, and one of the sergeants major was coming through with his replacement because he was retiring too from the G3, and he was basically showing him all of the different sections within the unit. Yeah. So he comes to my office, and my hair's a lot longer. I had like a nice little afro going with the wave grease in there. It was lined up nice and everything, and he.
Oh, Billy D. Williams.
Yeah, you know what I'm saying? And then he walks in and he's like, "So when you gonna get your hair cut?" And I'm like, Sergeant Major, and mind you, the new Sergeant Major that was replacing him was there with him, so of course he was, mean mugging me, waiting to see what my response was going to be. And I said, "Look, Sergeant Major," I said, for one, I'm within the Army regulation. Yeah. 2, I retire in like 60 days. I had like 2 months left in the Army. Yeah. And I'm looking at him like, bro, like, you messing with me, man? I'm getting out of here. Yeah. Like, all this stuff going on around here, and you're gonna worry about, my haircut. Now, it was within regulation. And this is where the discrimination comes in. And sometimes it's done unintentionally. I don't think that he was, doing it just to pick on me. It's just that, when they look at us and they look at our hair texture, being that I had a shortly little cropped afro that was tapered and all that other stuff, it looked like it was out of regulation. Now, when I look at the white boys that grow their hair out and they slick that mousse back on it, it doesn't look like they have a lot of hair in their head. But if you were to comb that out, their hair is like 6 inches long. Yeah. So I'm like, so you sitting here looking at me when my hair, even if I blew it out, it'll be about, maybe 2 inches long. Right. But you're saying my hair's too long.
I saw that.
Because it doesn't look like what you envision as, meeting the standard.
Right. Now, I remember a client, black female, she had a short haircut, like it was faded, and then, the top, she had sponge, so it has that look, that sponge look, like it's almost like it's twisted up or whatever. Mm-hmm. And I'm looking at it like, she said, my commander said I got to get it cut. I'm like, but why? It's within reg insofar as how tall it is, and or rather the height of her hair and the style. Like it wasn't, it wasn't over the top fashionable. It's just the way everyone's wearing their hair right now. I think that I believe her to be a homosexual, and I think that that's what her commander didn't like. I think it was that she was a homosexual, outwardly homosexual, and so he's probably thinking, oh, you think you're a boy, you gotta, since you're a boy, you gotta get a haircut. But like the female regulation, as far as it was for her,
right? She
was well in.
But because she didn't wear her hair long, like a woman, in his what he perceives a woman to be and look like, he discriminated against, and that was. And she probably got hit with a double whammy. Was she a black woman?
Yes.
So, looking at her as a woman, a black woman, and then a black woman that just happens to be, part of the LGBTQ community. And
I think so. I think that's what happened to her, because there's no way that her hair was not in regs for a female. I think he was looking. I believe to a degree, man. He treated her like she was a guy or something like that. Like it's almost like he was saying, "Oh, you want to be a guy? Well, go look like a guy," type thing. That's how I felt about it. Because when she told me the story, I was like, "Man, that's trash." And I'm looking at her hair like, "Nah, that's not. No,
right? Because they can have their hair much longer than ours.
Yes.
As long as it doesn't go past like the bottom edge of the collar, and even then, I think it's changed even more to where it can be as long as they want it to be.
Yeah. So as long as they pull it up when they do PT. Like,
right. Well, nowadays, they don't have to.
That's right.
They can have it all the way down when they do PT, but because she didn't fit his perception of what a woman should look like, he put her in this little box.
I think he put her in a box of dudes. Like, as a dude, that haircut may have been, out of reg. Sure, as a male soldier, that would be too much. But for what she had, she was absolutely within the reg. And I feel bad for her because that's who she works for. So I imagine that she probably deals, with all kinds of injustice over there, man. That's what we were talking about, before about black women. And I guess it's even more so in the military. My mother was a Navy chief, so I was a military brat growing up, and I look back on it now, and I'm just thinking, like, how does she navigated the Navy back when it was white, like when it was like just a white boy show, man, and she made it 21 years, and it never.
Gotta give credit to the sisters, man. Yeah. Sisters are like, I'm telling you, man, we can take this all the way back to the days of slavery, man, where, they would give birth to us, and then they would go right back out there and start picking cotton right after they gave birth, so there's a special kind of resiliency that goes along with that. So we as men, as black men, we gotta understand that, man, and that's where, we gotta go out of our ways to protect that, and keep it sacred. Not to go off topic with, the military, but like that transliterates all the way into, the military, because I've seen black women that were in prestigious leadership positions. Like my very last assignment, man, like all of the directorates, the directors were full-bird colonels, and we had one director that was a black female, and she was obviously treated a certain way in the meetings that we would sit in. They would kind of like low-key disenfranchise her as if she wasn't smart or intelligent enough, you know, to do certain things, or they would be extremely dismissive of her recommendations or comments. And, you know, I'd be sitting in these same meetings and I'm like, man, you know, and then you get the white boy that's sitting next to her, the white colonel sitting next to her, and he would say something that was, you know, mediocre at best, and they'll be like, oh yeah, that's it, give me more of that. And then, you know, and it would be a couple of moments where I would look at her, she would look at me and be like, it's that bullshit.
But you know what though, I would say this though about black women, insofar as Signal is concerned, the communications branch, there are several high-ranking black females, you know, in Signal. You can go with Fort Gordon right now and see it. I mean, they're everywhere.
Word.
And you know, and I'm happy for them for that.
Especially since they stood up cyber.
That's right. And I mean, like and there's still something about, I can't put a finger on it, brother, but like there's still something, like black women in the military, I feel like there's still, I think they take on a lot that others don't have to take on. Other female, you know, I mean, I would say in general, females don't get the best of treatment in the military, man. I gotta be honest.
Yeah, that's true. And that's definitely still a work in progress. Yeah. You know, even more so for the black woman. Mm-hmm. So the very last thing is, what's the solution, man, to fix institutional racism in the military? Like,
tell all the black people to leave.
I mean, as hardcore as that is, you know, sometimes that might have to be the move. And that, you know, to speak to that on a national level of, you know, any issue that we have, whenever we feel slighted, man, you know, sometimes we just gotta walk away, man. Yeah. Whether it's in professional basketball, football, you know, whatever, you know, walk away, you know, and then you'll start seeing, you know, the degradation of progress and effectiveness in some of those institutions, because they, you know, this is the deal, man. We didn't become lazy until slavery was over. And that's the irony behind that statement, is like, you know, they never called us lazy when we were being slaves and working on that plantation, but the minute they freed us, oh man, y'all lazy. Y'all lazy as hell, man. Y'all don't want to do nothing. And that's the crazy part, man. And like, we have to be twice as good, and if not, we can't just be great, man. We have to be exceptional. Yeah. I mean, you look at President Obama, you know, and I didn't agree with everything he did as our president, but, you know, looking at the pedigree of where he came from, like, he literally had to come into that office without blemish. Like, this man
he was perfect.
Yeah, no scandals, no cheating on his wife, no side chicks, no baby mamas, you know.
But they had such a hard time getting that dude. They had to go to his church and go after his pastor.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? To try to link him into some sort of extremist activity. I'm like, you guys are unbelievable, man.
And that's what we have to do in order for us to achieve anything. Even myself, being a small business owner, like, I had to go at lengths to be where I'm at, you know, as a small business person. I didn't get to inherit, you know, some money from family, or I didn't get to walk in a bank and just say, hey, let me get $100,000. And we knew a guy when I was in Washington State that was in the banking industry, and he told me and my wife point blank to our face, he was like, we would rather give loans to foreigners before we would give it to you. And I was like, why? He was like, because the banking industry as a whole has this mindset that, you know, Americans, particularly, you know, Black Americans are lazy and they're not responsible and they're not going to pay, you know, the money back. And I was like, wow. And this was a dude that was like extremely embedded into the banking industry, and I was like, that.
Yeah, you heard it from the horse's mouth.
Yeah, man. You know, so.
But I was making a joke, man, about the institutional racism. It's, you know, I don't know that you can remove it without identifying the areas where it is actually institutional, you know, where it's not personal, where, you know, so, like I said, stuff like special forces, you know, where there are a fewer number of, you know, Black males, Black females, you know. I think back to the swimming test that they implemented in special forces, and I'd asked First Sergeant about this one time. Like, they put the swim in the selection because they figured it would keep the brothers out, because a lot of brothers, I guess, back in the day weren't swimming.
Well, that's like a stereotype with Black folks. Black people don't know how to swim. We don't want to get in the water and all this other stuff, and so they do those things to keep us discouraged.
Yeah, his answer was really a deflection. It was more like, who thinks you should be in special forces and you can't swim? And I'm thinking to myself now, hindsight being 2020, as we were saying earlier. Well, I had a company commander who was a tab guy, and he could not swim. White boy. And he couldn't swim, so like, how did he get through if he can't swim? Mm-hmm. Who is this guy? I mean, like, who's his father? What? Like, he can't swim.
It's them handshakes, man.
Bruh, it's gotta be.
You know, but see, that's a thing that most people don't know, that happens, man. People get assignments. People get certain attaboys with, you know, because they know somebody.
Yeah.
You know, and I've literally seen that, man. Like, I knew a guy that was he was an aide for, you know, one of the generals in the unit that I was in, my last assignment, man. And because he was plugged in by being this guy's aide, like, his career is set in stone now. Like, this guy is probably going to make general because he was, you know, he was the guy's aide, and then, you know, he got a chance to go everywhere he went and got plugged in with all of these other generals, and, you know,
right place, right time,
now everybody knows his face. His face is everywhere now. Yeah. So, like, when he starts going to these promotion boards, especially when he's looked at, and he made lieutenant colonel before I left, and he was a major. So majors are aides for 3-star generals. So he made lieutenant colonel. You know, he's probably going to make colonel, and more than likely he'll see general. That's you know, right. And he's one of them fast track. He's a tab guy. Okay. He's a double tab guy. He was a special forces ranger. Yeah. So dude's gonna make it. Yeah. You know, he's one of the boys.
One of the boys.
So, but I believe in that. I believe that when you establish certain connections, you know, you can make certain things happen for you in the military. I think it happens more for white folks than it does Black folks, just because you don't see too many of us in positions of influence, unless it's on the enlisted side. That's where a lot of us get our connections from, on the enlisted side. That's one of the reasons why I stayed enlisted instead of going officer, because that path to be an officer, a Black officer in the military, it's lonely, man.
I was gonna say, I'm sure. I can imagine it's lonely.
But when you're an enlisted guy, man, you got a bunch of brothers that's holding your hand throughout the way, man, and you can tap into that. And that was very helpful for me throughout my career as a senior enlisted guy. But the Black officers, man, they always caught hell, and I was like, why do you continue to punish yourself doing that? And they're like, you know, it's like, I'm gonna retire. I gotta get that bag. That's right. Know? And I get it.
That's really it. At the end of the day, I mean, it's that bag, man. You know, it started way back when, man. Like, this institutional racism thing. Like, you know, I wonder if it's not even still prevalent today, where recruiting stations are the places that sort of cattle herd, you know, corral people into certain jobs because that's the way it's supposed to work. You know what I mean? Like, you're a Black male, so I'm less likely to suggest that you be 11 Bravo. You know, more likely to suggest you like 19 Delta, be a tank guy or something like that. I mean, there was just a time I remember reading it that the leadership of the military felt that black soldiers would not fight, that they would probably be too afraid to fight, and that they're, in general, lacking of fortitude it takes to complete the training and then to also perform the job.
See, man, that's such a bullshit statement, man.
I got it, man.
And we fought in every doggone war that this country has had.
Every single one.
From the very beginning, we even fought in the doggone Civil War, And 9 times out of 10, they sent us in first.
That's
Vietnam,
right.
They sent the brothers in first.
Yep.
To be, fodder for, to soften the blow so the white boys can go in and do cleanup while we go in there and take the majority of casualties and stuff like that. So like for them to, and this is where I hate those big giant think tanks that come into these units and want to, make all of these assessments of, how a unit should be structured, and then they start tying race into it, and this is where institutional racism comes into play, is because when we don't get to control our own narrative on how we're perceived by the rest of the country and the rest of the world, that's a problem. You know what I'm saying? That's a huge problem. So like, we get out of the military and, we're still viewed a certain way. And I'll tell you, man, I think a lot of the reasons that, things didn't necessarily happen to me with regard to the police and whatnot was because I was in uniform.
Yeah.
I think wearing that uniform shielded me from a lot of the bullshit that our brothers and sisters that never wore the uniform have to deal with. But the minute you take that uniform off, man, it's fair game. And it's
there was that Sergeant First Class in Kentucky, right? Where she was driving home. She was in uniform. A white woman followed her to the gas station and attempted to accost her with a knife because she said that the woman had no business there. There's no way she could afford a house over there or whatever. Like, she just felt like she wasn't. That's very bold.
Yeah, and that's a part of institutional racism. That's a part of how we're perceived because we don't control our own narrative.
Yeah.
And going back to what you said on what the solution is, he was like, you basically said, get out, walk away.
Yeah.
Leave whatever institution you're under, and and see how they function without it. If all the brothers and sisters walked away from the military, they walked away from sports, walked away from all of these things, country would probably fall apart. And I know that's a pretty strong statement to make, but a lot of us are the glue in a lot of these organizations, man. We do it silently, and they have certain expectations of us, and then on top of that, they just kind of expect us to always be there.
Yeah.
Just like the guy that his job might be to keep power running for the entire building, and he's a black dude, and he's never complained about his pay, or any of that. But if that brother walks away and there's nobody else that knows how to do his job, it falls apart. The foundation falls apart, and those are the things that I think sometimes that white America takes for granted with regard to Black America.
Oh, for sure, man. Like, think about all the essential workers, all the frontliners right now. I mean, they're people of color, man. Largely people of color. You know what I mean? That's the other reason why I suspect the numbers of COVID-19 deaths are disproportionately affecting, Black Americans. I think it's because, essentially this is how I say it. They were too poor to save their own lives. You know what I mean? They had to go to work. They had to get that check. They can't afford to not be there.
Right.
You know what I'm saying? So if the store is still open and operating, their management expects them to be there. I mean, even though there's very dangerous times, stuff like anything can happen. And these people are also, all the time, a lot of times don't have, I'm not saying all the time, a lot of times they don't have the best medical coverage. You know what I mean? So again, they can't even save their own, they're too poor to save their own lives.
Mm.
I mean, it's unfortunate.
Well, I think we covered everything today on being black in the military. Of course, we could go on for hours about this,
that's
man.
Right.
This is a very loaded topic, and I'm pretty sure that those of you that are listening that served in the military could have chimed in on a million different things. But these are some of the small challenges and stuff that Chris and I went through when we wore the uniform. It is different, you know. It is. We live in two different Americas, and being black in the military, unfortunately, you're in two different armies.
That's right.
There's certain things we have to do in order to get things done or to achieve certain goals, man. We have to do it a certain way, and we have a code that we go by. That's, you know, it's kind of unspoken, but it's informal and it's also implied.
Yeah.
So it's different. I think that does it. I think that does it, man.
RJ, man, thank you for your time. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, man, it was a pleasure. You know, one of these days we got to try to get you back on again and talk about some other stuff. But next week, guys, I'm not quite sure what the topic is going to be, but I have one in mind. I'm thinking about something along the lines of mental health for Black America. And I do have a guest that I'd like to bring on and talk about that. So please do, guys, let me know what you think. I really do appreciate you guys coming out. Mr. Pop Dixon, my brother, it was a pleasure having you on the show.
Likewise.
And I would love to have you back on here again. I always enjoy chopping it up with you. And
yeah, let's do it again.
Yeah, no doubt. So, guys, we appreciate you. We love you. Shalom and blessings.